Arthur Asher Miller was born in New York City on October 17, 1915. He attended the University of Michigan, and after receiving his degree, he returned to New York to write. After several failed novels and plays, he wrote Death of a Salesman, which won a Tony Award and the Pulitzer Prize. His next play was The Crucible, which he wrote as an allegory for the hysteria of the Red Scare and McCarthyism in the early 1950s. He wrote The Crucible to show how baseless rumors and innuendos can erode the foundations of society at any time. Ironically, the play brought Miller to the attention of Senator McCarthy. It turns out that the government had considered Miller a communist sympathizer since 1940. The fear of being subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee led many critics to speak out against the play, and many of Miller's friends shunned him. 2 years later, he was charged with contempt of Congress for refusing to name names, but this charge was revoked in 1958 by the United States Court of Appeals. Through all of this, Miller continued to write to critical acclaim. In addition to his Pulitzer Prize, he had amassed 7 Tony Awards, 2 Drama Critics Circle Awards, and the John F. Kennedy Lifetime Achievement Award. His personal life was no less storied. He was married 3 times, including once to Marilyn Monroe. Miller died on February 10, 2005. The Puritan religion is rooted in a movement to purify the Church of England in 1534. Puritans drew on the teachings of John Calvin, and their strict religious beliefs informed every aspect of their lives. Unable to achieve the reform they wanted in England, many Puritans left England and settled in Massachusetts. Their form of government was a theocracy, a government ruled by religious leaders in the name of God. Simultaneously, this repressive form of government gave the citizens no vent for ordinary human emotions, a condition that, in Miller's opinion, led inevitably to the Salem witch trials of 1692. The witch trials happened when some Salem girls exhibited odd symptoms, including screaming and contortions, which were diagnosed as demonic possession. 3 women were accused of bewitching them, and a court was formed to try the accused for witchcraft. Throughout 1692, hundreds of men, women, and children were accused, and over 20 witches were hanged before the hysteria subsided in 1693. The play begins with an overture explaining characters, background, and witchcraft hysteria at the time of America's founding. Reverend Parris kneels beside his daughter Betty, who he had found with some other girls the previous night dancing in the woods. Abigail Williams contends they only danced. Betty fainted when Reverend Parris jumped out of the bushes. John Proctor walks in, and Abigail, with whom he had had an affair months previously, tries to woo him back. He refuses her, which makes her furious, and she disparages his wife Elizabeth. John Proctor and Reverend Parris feud. Giles Corey sides with John Proctor regarding Reverend Parris's negative ministry, and Putnam jumps into the argument on the minister's side. Reverend Hale joins in, and the conversation turns to witchcraft and the conjuring of evil spirits. Mrs. Putnam mentions that Tituba can speak to the dead. Tituba mentions that the devil has spoken to her and names some people as well. Betty wakes up and starts naming other Salem citizens as the devil's disciples, and Abigail joins her in her accusations. Elizabeth Proctor begs John Proctor to say that Abigail had confessed to him that their dancing in the woods involved no witchcraft. They fight about her suspicions that he still is attracted to Abigail. Mary Warren enters and gives Elizabeth a puppet she made during the day's trial. She tells Elizabeth her name was mentioned during the trial. Giles Corey and Francis Nurse announce their wives have been arrested, and Elizabeth is arrested as well for trying to murder Abigail by casting a spell on her using the puppet Mary Warren gave her. Proctor, Nurse, and Corey try to overturn their wives' arrests. Mary Warren explains that she and the girls have been faking, but then she recants under heavy interrogation and the other girls' intimidation. John Proctor confesses his affair with Abigail and says his wife will affirm his admission because she would never lie. She does lie, though, thinking she is saving her husband's reputation. She realizes she has condemned him to death when John admits he told the court the truth. John Proctor is arrested for trying to bewitch Mary Warren. Reverend Hale denounces the court. Reverend Parris tells Judge Hawthorne and Deputy Governor Danforth that Abigail left town with Mercy Lewis and that he fears the townspeople will riot if John Proctor, Rebecca Nurse, and Martha Corey are hanged. Deputy Governor Danforth refuses to postpone or pardon the three scheduled to hang. Elizabeth and John realize that he can either lie and confess so he can live, or die knowing he is innocent but carry the truth to his grave. Elizabeth will not make this decision for him. He reluctantly agrees to sign the confession but changes his mind when the judges want to post it on the door of the church. John Proctor rips up the confession and says he cannot shame his good name by lying, and he walks to the gallows and is hanged. Some of the symbols in the crucible include the poppet. The poppet Mary Warren sews for Elizabeth symbolizes the power of subversion. Abigail Williams observes Mary sticking a needle in the doll's stomach, subverting the meaning of the poppet from an innocent plaything to evidence of witchcraft. A crucible is a piece of laboratory equipment able to withstand high temperatures, but in the play, it symbolizes the heat of hysteria that takes over Salem during the witch trials. The hunt for witches in Salem symbolizes the citizens' Puritan worldview that the salvation of the soul involves fighting between God and the devil. Themes in the crucible include mob mentality. The chaotic energy of a mob means individuals begin to think as a single unit, canceling out the thoughts or reason of any one person, fueling the witch hunt. In the crucible, the problem of social injustice is intense. Anyone who holds a different perspective than the government or church officials is suspected of heretical thinking and possibly of siding with the devil. Many characters in the crucible care more about their personal reputations than the well-being of others in the community. They are motivated to sin in order to preserve their public images. For example, John Proctor is motivated to honor his private image of himself rather than to protect his life through a false confession. When Arthur Miller went to Salem to read the court documents associated with the infamous witch trials held there, the citizens of the town were not eager to remain associated with this horrible miscarriage of justice. However, the wild success of his play about the 17th century events had the unforeseen consequence of making Salem a tourist attraction. Today, tourism is a $100 million a year industry in Salem, Massachusetts, where one can see staged recreations of the 1692 trials at the Salem Witch Museum, or tour an historic 17th century home touted as the Witch House. The greedy Thomas Putnam would have been delighted.